The following is something I wrote on the night that somebody who profoundly changed my life passed away, and that is my ag teacher, Mr. Chad Waldron. At first, the only reason I shared this on Substack instead of just putting it on Facebook and whatnot is because it was the easiest way to get it out where people don't have issues accessing it. And I really debated whether sharing it in audio form, like publishing it more, but I kind of came to a conclusion that I think this is the right thing to do for a couple of reasons. For one, it remembers him in the way that he deserves to be remembered. And for two, I think it's really important to think about the people who have changed your life because unfortunately, you don't think about it a lot until they're gone. So I hope that this gives you something that you can use to think about. Maybe it's Mr. Waldron or maybe it's somebody else in your life that has made a huge difference, and just give a moment of appreciation to them, whether they're still with us or not. Hope you enjoy this. Let's get real. Throughout our lives, beginning at a young age, there are people who we look up to as giants. And although Mr. Waldron wasn't very tall, he's always going to be remembered as a giant. Mr. Waldron didn't earn this status for any one thing that he taught his students, but rather he earned it by being a life-changing, community-shaping force in North Lake School and the North Lake community more generally. There are diplomas, careers, and in my case, even a significant other that can be owed to Mr. Waldron for the work that he did in and out of the ag classroom. I'm just one of the students who owe him this unpayable debt for the way that he changed my life. Here's how he shaped it. On a cold January day, I routinely walked into the North Lake Agriculture classroom for class. When I walked through the door, I saw there was this huge group of classmates huddled around these large boxes on a table near Mr. Waldron's desk. So I joined the group, looked inside the boxes, and saw a ton of audio recording equipment. I asked Mr. Waldron why the equipment was in the ag room of all places, and he told me that he'd used a big amount of grant money to purchase the equipment for an audio production project. I was really excited because I've always been an avid podcast listener, so I asked him if we can make a podcast with the new equipment. He said yes. After a few days of figuring out where to plug in cords and how to get everything set up, we finally had a podcast studio. But when it came time to press record, Mr. Waldron and I were the only ones who had the bravery to speak into the microphone. It was funny. It was as though everybody else vanished. So we adopted the titles of host and co-host. We recorded a few simple episodes, just basic news updates about North Lake FFA and the ag program. To be quite frank, they were pretty awful, but after a few episodes, we got the hang of it, so we started interviewing guests. I remember just sending emails and emails and emails out, asking Mr. Waldron, like, what do you think about state legislators? What do you think about, people in the Oregon government? And he was like, yeah, just do it. Send an email. So we ended up getting some yeses. Guests ended up including everybody from Mr. Waldron's daughter, Raven, to state legislators like Vicky Breeze Iverson. And what began as this fun, awesome project, it quickly turned into a community news outlet that was pretty serious. School and life in March of 2020 got turned upside down by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Waldron and I realized that the podcast, even though we couldn't do it at school anymore, could be a way to share the news with the community in light of public places closing. I remember the day after we realized how crazy life was going to get, I snuck into the ag room so Mr. Waldron could pass off all the podcast equipment because we wanted to keep it going. He risked a lot by doing that. I was not supposed to be there. Our first pandemic episode was with Mr. Kerr, who was North Lake superintendent at the time. We just talked about kind of news and what the world was looking like. And even though we weren't at school anymore, we continued to record episodes over the phone so that community members could share their experiences in what was a pretty crazy lockdown world. Despite the pandemic making Mr. Waldron's life more stressful than ever as a teacher, he still loved recording podcasts, which blew my mind. He'd been teaching for 25 years at the time, and he told me almost every time we spoke, this is the hardest my job has ever been in all that time. The project, in light of that, became the shining star when finding the bright side of anything was super difficult. And for me, it was a really dark time in life. I was in the minority of students who missed being in the classroom, especially the agriculture classroom, because when school was canceled, so were all the FFA activities, which were the things that I looked forward to the most throughout the year. I had this dream of running for state office starting freshman year, and as the calendar faded, so did that dream. In a world of cancellations that was quite frankly terrible, the podcast was one of the few things that kept going steady. When school reopened in the fall of 2020, it did not look anything the same. I had the option to stay online, keep doing my classwork that way to graduate, or I could just attend 2 days per week, barely be there, and work the rest of the time. The podcast and Mr. Waldron with it were the true motivation for me to come back to school. Throughout the fall of that year, I spent pretty much all of my time at school just working on the podcast, and all that passion that would have gone into FFA was put into interviewing community members and public officials and anybody else we could find with Mr. Waldron. When January came, I had to decide if I would chase the dream of running for state office that I'd had since freshman year, or if I was going to let it die like the FFA calendar had. I had done a lot of thinking about it, couldn't really come up with a decision, so I asked Mr. Waldron if I should do it, and he said the same word that he said almost exactly 1 year before: yes. With Mr. Waldron's support, the dream was revived. I spent the next 2 months preparing for this really extensive virtual interview process. After I was done preparing, the interviews came, and Mr. Waldron unlocked the ag room so that I could use his computer with good internet connection on a weekend. When I made it to the election process, Mr. Waldron invited the entire chapter to watch me give my speech on the computer. And when I got elected, Mr. Waldron was standing right behind the computer screen, smiling, although I will say he was a little surprised, which is funny. If the pandemic was like this really dark, terrible winter, the next year as an Oregon State officer was just the warmest, sunniest spring you can imagine. I met my best friends. I met mentors. I found meaning and fulfillment that after the pandemic I thought was literally impossible. State office ended up connecting me to the scholarship that sent me here to Oklahoma State University. And then it also allowed me to grow when I ran for national FFA office. It eventually even connected me to the girl that I now plan to marry someday. The thing is, you could look at this and say, yeah, state office, like that was the root of everything. That's where it started, but it wasn't. I realize now that state office is not the root of what I cherish today. Mr. Waldron is. On May 24th, 2024, I really recognize one man's role in a chain of events that changed my life. If it wasn't for Mr. Waldron's support, we wouldn't have started or continued podcasting. If we weren't podcasting, I would never have returned to the ag classroom. If I hadn't returned to the ag classroom or had Mr. Waldron's support again, I wouldn't have ran for state office. And if I hadn't become a state officer, my life would not be anywhere close to the same as it is today. It's hard for me now, like as I record this and just the way I'm living life right now, it's hard for me to think of a single opportunity that doesn't lead back to Mr. Waldron in one way or another. If I think of somebody who's introduced me to an opportunity that wasn't Mr. Waldron, chances are I probably met that person through something Mr. Waldron introduced me to. This podcast, as I record it right now, I would never be doing this without Mr. Waldron. Last fall, I failed to get National FFA office. Mr. Waldron sent me this encouraging text anyway. He said, "I'm very proud of you. You've represented well and have put Northlake on the map. It's been the talk of the town in Oregon FFA all week. Peace, Mr. Waldron." When he sent that, it was a time where I was just kind of like tired of getting messages. I really appreciated it. I did, because I knew that he didn't appreciate me, and he wasn't proud of me for the way I performed or whether I got it or not. He appreciated me for the work I did, and the work I did as a student who, from Northlake, typically wouldn't do that kind of thing. But there was one thing he was wrong about. Mr. Waldron was somebody who would call you out if you were wrong. So I'm going to call him out because he was wrong about this. I didn't put Northlake on the map. He did. He was the foundations of all of my accomplishments inside and outside of the FFA, and I really pale in comparison to his. Think about the dozens of students who Mr. Waldron inspired to graduate by breaking up the monotony of Common Core education with his ag classes. Think about the commercial grade meat lab that Mr. Waldron got the grant funding for and did all the work to set up that sits at Northlake High School. Think about the careers in agriculture and mechanics that all started in Mr. Waldron's classroom. The thing is, fancy jackets are flashy. I have a very rare FFA jacket for a Northlake student that brought a lot of attention. But the students who left Northlake changed as productive members of society who are probably going to go on to support people that they wouldn't have otherwise. those legacies are infinitely more important. And he did that. So in conclusion, Mr. Waldron, I'm proud of you. Rest in peace, Giant. Looking around the closet that I'm standing in right now, recording this, the podcast setup that I'm using right now is basically a smaller version of what we used in the ag room of the equipment that Mr. Waldron bought. I pretty much went and bought all the similar stuff for myself because I enjoyed the setup. But even beyond that, like, I'm looking at the stuff in the closet. It's the same as what Mr. Waldron introduced me to. I'm standing in Stillwater, Oklahoma, a place that Mr. Waldron didn't introduce me to directly, but if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't ended up here. Somewhere in this closet is my FFA jackets and all kinds of other things, notes, letters, journal entries, things that came from people that he introduced me to. When I say that there's not a single part of my life that can't be traced back to him somehow, that's not an exaggeration whatsoever. He made a profound difference in my life, and I am very grateful for that. I think what is most interesting about that, though, is like Mr. Waldron and I weren't like the best of friends. We didn't talk very often. We probably saw each other 2-3 times a year after I graduated, talked on the phone or texted about the same. But the fact that we weren't like, the best of friends, super close personally, it goes to show that the people who give you a lot in life, they don't have to be the ones that are right there holding your hand the whole way, making you feel comfortable, making you feel loved. I knew that Mr. Waldron was proud of me. I knew that he appreciated the things that I'd done. But even though we weren't like super close buddy, he still did everything he possibly could for me as a student and as, me being his mentee to a point to give me a chance and set me up for success in the future. So as you think of the people who give you a lot in life, think about it might not be the people that are closest to you. It might not be the people that are front and center in your life that you see every day or that you really cherish. It could be somebody in the distance who's watching over you, giving you opportunities, even if they're a ways away. And that's who Mr. Waldron was to me. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that you can take a moment to appreciate somebody in your life who has given you a lot, whether they're still with us or not. Hopefully they are. And with that, I'll catch you in the next episode.